I have got to tell you about our story and how you came here. I had sent the email announcing the first call for papers and presentation for our conference here, and I think it was a couple of weeks later I had an email, which I believe now was your assistant, Hope, am I right? And she had written to me that we have received this email and so on. But I hadn't sent it because I didn't have their email address. Somebody had forwarded it. And can you please tell me a bit about your organization, what you do, and what is this conference about, blah, 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 blah. So I wrote back, and a few days later, I had a very nice email from Susan that she has visited the website, she has seen the previous conferences, she has seen this, and she has seen that, and she would be very pleased to come to the conference. So we started a dialogue online. We just met here at this conference a couple of days ago. And then the more we had dialogue, the more we had conversation, the more we realized we share a lot. Then I started to learn about your work, what you do, and so on. And Susan very kindly put the panel, that excellent panel that we had this morning, she put it together. All the speakers, friends, and so on, Susan did. And then I said, Susan, we have also got a storytelling sessions. How about you come and share your story with us? So I'm very pleased that you're here. Now, the reason for this storytelling session is a couple of years ago, time flies, after nearly 16, 17 years since I resigned my post at Coventry University, and I left the university and so on, I found courage within me because it was some sad period that I went through. I wrote a story, and the title of the story was Coventry and I, the story of a boy from Iran who became a man in Coventry. And the first point of that story was in 1973, after I had met Annie in Oxford, that later on became my wife. She had taken me to Coventry to meet with her parents, and we went to Coventry Cathedral, as all the visitors to Coventry go. And we went to the old cathedral, the ruins of the bombed cathedral. And in the old altar, I saw the words, "Father, forgive." And I didn't know who the Father was. I didn't know anything about Christianity at that time. I thought it was Father versus Mother. So I asked Annie who the Father is and what's going on. She tried to explain to me, but I'm sure she knew that I was not getting it. And then, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit and the three in one and so on was too much for me at that time to understand. Anyways, that word, Father, forgive, it really impacted my life. And later on, I did some stuff in Coventry inspired by Father Forgive, which I thought was a worthy story. And after that, when I published that thing online, I received many, many emails and notes from all over the world, the way people have been influenced by Father Forgive when they visited Coventry Cathedral. Then I said, okay, maybe it's about time. We had a storytelling project at GCGI. And before you start your presentation, let me just read these couple of sentences because it is the essence of you talking tonight, sharing your story with us. Once upon a time, one away back day, long ago and far away, before the beginning of time, before the beginning of everything, before there was a beginning, there was a storyteller. A storytelling is the beginning of everything. The storytellers were our first teachers, artists, philosophers, and priests. The stories told us how to understand the world. The stories are the roots of everything we know, our culture, our philosophy, and our religion. Storytelling has the capacity to touch our deepest emotions, as it can allow us to peer at beauty. We glance at our own creativity and breathe our own thoughts. But more than that, storytelling is also a wonderful path to set ourselves free by opening our hearts to others and letting them in, becoming one with one another. Because after all, as many have reminded us, the best way to know truth, wisdom, and beauty is to try to express it and share it with others. I firmly believe that storytelling, opening our hearts to others, is instrumental in enhancing inclusion, social justice, cultural life, and improving physical and emotional health at the individual, local, national, and international levels. Moreover, storytelling nurtures both the young people and the older generation by providing a spiritual path to a meaningful and rewarding intergenerational dialogue, benefiting each group equally. And it's quite true. I was carrying so much pain in my heart, which was affecting my well-being, physical and emotional. After I wrote that story and I got it all out, it healed me. And the emails that I have received from people, it has been a healing process for other people who have been able to share their stories openly. Having said that, I am delighted that you're here, Susan, tonight. You have got a wonderful story to share with us. So please, the podium is yours, and share your story with us. Thank you. I'll go and sit there so I can also see the beautiful pictures I didn't show you.
Well, I'm not going to show too many pictures because you told me to tell my story.
Okay.
But I have lots of pictures if people want to see them when I'm finished with my story.
Oh, sorry, I can't sit there, so I can't leave.
But there will be a movie.
All right.
I get so into what I'm talking about, I'm going to forget to tell you later. So I'm going to tell you briefly now that I have an enormous website called Earthfire Institute. There are videos, there are podcasts, interviews with really neat people around the world, lots of stories, lots of pictures. So please feel free to go visit it. I also have an e-newsletter I do every 2 weeks with animal stories and other things. So if you want to do that, you can give me your email here, because I'm going to forget. And I also do a hard copy newsletter twice a year. Here's some samples. That's my partner Jean with Miss Clover the Badger. So you're free to take these. And if you want to receive the hard copy, I need your physical address. So that's that. And also, I've started this thing where I will do online conversations the third Wednesday of every month, which is open to the whole world. And it's a conversation about what we can do about the earth, what actions each of us can take to support each other, because it is hard to do stuff alone. And the last thing is I started something, and that's a handout there too if you'd like, which is to set up a conversation online. If anybody wants to ever host it, just get a few people together, and then I will be there to have a conversation with the whole group, whoever wants to set that up. The details are there. I'm going to forget it all, like I said. So the fundamental story, can everybody hear me in the back? Yes. The fundamental story, Carmen will love this, is I fell in love. And once you're in love, what can you do but follow it? So I'm going to read a short something from that I wrote. And in their babyhood, I cradled them, all these different creatures, holding their bottles as they greedily sucked the nutrients down in their bid for life. I wondered that the mysterious alchemy of milk transferred into wolf, milk into bear, milk into deer, inanimate minerals and molecules transformed into life and form and beauty, and fused somehow with a mysterious animating spirit. Eyes half closed, they would pull impatiently on the nipple until the flow was just right. Then they would begin a magic, even rhythm, and their eyes would soften and moisten as they gave themselves totally to the surrounding completeness of the moment, held, safe, fed. Holding them close, feeling their heartbeat, in intimate contact as they peacefully, eagerly, trustingly, blissfully nursed, feeling their life, their unique individuality, I fell in love each time anew. My feelings responded of their own volition. Bemused, I would watch them rising from within, surprised at their intensity. From where did they come? I was falling in love with so many different creatures, so different from my own species. What was the common ground that my body recognized, maybe sprang from itself, if each life form is an expression of something more fundamental? What is the heritage of these urges to be a nurturer of life, regardless of form? It's right that each individual in each species be seen, appreciated, acknowledged as its own important part of the resplendent tapestry of life. With love, we bear witness to the beauty. With love, we want to protect. With love, we want to fight for the beloved. So that's actually what I wrote after the 7 wolf puppies I met destroyed my life. So, briefly, because Cameron asked for my story, my parents fled Austria. One of my grandparents was Jewish, and my father emigrated to England at the University of Cambridge, and that's where I was born. And then we emigrated to the United States. And apparently I was so shy as a child, the doctor told me not me, I was 3 years old, told my mother that I had to be forced to go out or I'd never face the world. Unfortunately, she gave those instructions to my older sister, who didn't really like me very much, so that didn't help at all, but I managed. So I had a fairly difficult time because of that intense shyness. Went to college and decided I really needed to do something about it. So I looked for a counselor. I went to 13. At 13, I found someone who knew something. And I considered myself profoundly lucky to find someone who really knew how to connect and help ease the pain and the hollowness and the emptiness that so many of us feel. So I thought this was really interesting, so I decided to go ahead and get a PhD in psychology, which I loved. And I did a fair amount of work with it. I also worked in the hardcore prisons, super maximum prisons, and I absolutely loved the work, but it was exhausting, dealing with all that pain within all those walls. But I did love it. When my father emigrated, we came to the East Coast, and the East Coast just didn't speak to me. It was crowded, it was green, but crowded. And when we were about 11, I was 11 or 12, we moved out, we took a vacation out west, and I looked at the mountains and I said, I want to live here. It took me another 20 years, it's 30 years or so, but I did. So I came out west, and in the process said, I've always loved wolves. And I have no idea why I always loved wolves, I just did. I had never met one, I just loved them. And then I heard that you could get wolf dogs. I said, who can have a wolf? Nobody can have a wolf. But when I heard about wolf dogs, I said, I don't care about the consequences, I'm gonna get a wolf dog, which I did. And then I made a promise to that dog. He wasn't a wolf, and he wasn't a dog, that I'd never leave him alone. So he came with me everywhere. If I had a board meeting, because I was running a nature center at the time, if I had a board meeting down on Wall Street, I wouldn't go unless I could bring him. And it's amazing how if you really push, people will let you. So I fell in love with him completely. Before that, my parents wouldn't let me have any animals, so I finally got even with them. I was allowed a parakeet, which I loved. Then when I was getting my doctorate, this little scrawny gray kitten came up on the farmhouse I was renting. And I think he was probably thrown out of a car, like they do, like a bag of kittens. And I'd like all animals, but I didn't have a special affinity for cats. But he was an animal, and he needed something. So probably about 6 hours later, he was on my chest, purring, and I was gone. And I don't think I was married at the time, and I have to say, this might be why the marriage didn't work, I loved that cat more deeply than anything I'd ever loved before. It was so profound and earth-shaking. He died of a strange disease after a couple of years, and I still feel devastated all these years later, but I fell in love deeply. After all of that, I got my lovely wolf dog, and because I got the wolf dog, I decided to do right by him. I had to meet everybody who had wolf dogs. There may be like 15 or 20 people at the time. It had just started. So I got in my car and traveled all around the United States and met everyone who had a wolf dog. To learn, how am I going to take care of this animal that's not capped, that's not wild, that's not tame, that's half and half? And in the process, someone told me there was this guy who had wolves who were really beautiful and I should go meet him. So she and I went up on New Year's Eve up to the wilds of Utah at 8,000 feet in a blizzard, so much so we had to stay overnight. We couldn't get up the pass. And then I walked up this driveway, and there in front of me was a row of these incredible creatures. They were so vibrant, and it was moonlight. It was so vibrant and alive and intelligent and kinetic. It was just magnificent. And the guy's name was Jean, who is now a co-founder of Earthfire. And I have to say his wolves were wonderful. And so he used to train wildlife for movies. And he did it in a way, he's got really bad ADD, so he can't function a lot in normal ways, but he has this profound connection with animals. And he would train the animals with this connection, not with anything other than this deep connection. And when I saw that, I said, you know, I've always loved animals. I love psychology, I love people, but I think I love nature and animals equally. How do I combine these two? When I saw how he was with the animals, I said, you know, we have to work together. I love teaching, sharing, I love writing. He can't do much of that. He's incredible as a teacher if he doesn't have to use words. Let's join forces. And so we did. So I was still working in the prisons while he started to look for land. And he found this land by the Tetons. And we started to try to get permits. Now, trying to get permits in Idaho, where they hate every single animal I have, wolves, bears, coyotes, foxes, badgers, bison, they kill them all, was an interesting trip. It took 4 years and 6 trips all the way from Colorado, where I was teaching in the prisons, up to Idaho, which is 12 to 14-hour drive each way, 6 times, as the community tried to stop us from being able to buy the land and get the permits. Somehow we got through all of the hearings, and they gave us the permits. And then we began to bring some animals up, and they said, oh no, we gave you permits to have the animals. We didn't give you any permits to bring them into the state. By this point, we had already said, Jean had moved up and started to put in a well, because the land was just wild land, nothing. There wasn't even a bridge to it, just a culvert you could sort of drive over. So he came up early before we even closed on the land, which is crazy in retrospect. And he started to put in a well and electricity and all that, and then it took us 4 years to get the permits to bring the animals in. And that was really interesting because the only way we got the animals in was a super conservative, far-right, conservative Mormon rancher who happened to be in charge of the purse strings of Fish and Game from whom we had to get the permit. And he said, you know what, I really believe in conservative principles, and this isn't right. You gave them permission, let the market forces determine it. And since he held the purse strings, we finally got the permit. Most unlikely of all possible combinations. When I was down in Colorado and John was up suffering in the dead of winter without much heat, putting in things, I had this image. And I'm not given to images too much, but I had this image of these huge forces above the land. It was like, almost like good and evil. Not quite, I don't know quite what the right words were, but or positive and negative. And they were just like circling across the land, and that somehow we just slipped right in, down underneath between those in order to make the land and get the land. Once we got the land, our neighbors weren't happy. They defecated in front of our gate. They shot at us. Some of the fish and game people said, you have a permit, but you're not have a permit for this, and you don't have a permit for that, and we're going to come and take the animals. And if they come and take the animals, that means they're going to kill them. So Jean had a baby bear at that time. We hid him in the woods and put all kinds of hay around it, because I don't know if you ever heard a baby bear lonely, screaming. They're loud. So we hid him in the woods, and when the fish and game came, they said, "There's a sick cow somewhere." We said, "Yeah, really sick, over there." But we couldn't risk it, so I went back down to Colorado, where I still had a place, with a bear, a screaming bear, and a white wolf and 3 white wolf babies, because they didn't give us permission for any of them. So I was driving down the highway at 80 miles an hour, because this bear was deciding he really didn't want to be in a cage, and he wanted to be free in the car, and the wolves were howling. And suddenly I get this phone call from Jean saying, "Do you hear those shots? I just want you to know if something happens to me that I'm being shot at." So we didn't have an easy time of it in the beginning. Then when I came up and we were walking the fields, they still shot at us. I don't think they meant to hit us, but the bullets came pretty close. But it didn't matter. We were going to do this. When I met Jean, he had just rescued some wolf puppies from a movie. He'd just done White Fang, I think it was. And they wanted babies, so they had a wolf who gave birth. And then after photographing the babies, they didn't want them anymore. So Jean took them, and then he asked me if I would like to help raise them. And as someone said here, "Are you going to say no?" So that's what happened to me. They were very young, and there were 7 of them, and to get the nipple in just right, you have to hold them against your chest, and you have the nipple, so it's just so, and then you close it around their mouth, and then they start the sucking. And you do this for 7, and you feel their heartbeat. And a friend of mine came down to visit, and she said, "You know what happened to you, Susan?" I said, "No." She said, "Motherhood." And I don't have children of my own, but I could feel the oxytocin. I swear I could feel the oxytocin cycling. And the bond was so intense that there was nothing I wouldn't do for those babies. And they all lived long, wonderful lives. Star dance and wind song and autumn dancer and star dance, and lovely, lovely animals. And that was the end of my life as I knew it. So when I fell that deeply in love, and then later I fell that deeply in love with all these other animals, I said, I've got to share this. I've got to share the beauty in who these animals are, not just for their sake, but for our sake. The wonder that's there and the possibility of connection that's there, I've got to do something about it, which is when I decided to found Earthfire. And that took a while too. We got the nonprofit status in maybe 2000, I think. So we're pretty small. It's Jean and myself, and he has a couple of assistants, and I have a couple of assistants, and that's it. But we're also pretty committed. Oh, they also shot our dog, if I didn't say, at Christmas, right through the heart. That was difficult. That dog had bonded with Teton Totem, the bear I told you about a little bit this morning. And that bear went into this deep depression for months. He didn't know who his friend was. And they tried to make friends with another dog we had, but the bond wasn't the same. He would offer the dog his chicken, and the dog would come and happily take the chicken. And there was no no reciprocity. It was very hard to take. So we started Earthfire because we were going to do this. We were going to share these animals with people. And then I started learning. I hadn't had anything to do with wild animals, really, other than my wolf dog, which was not that high content wolf, thank goodness, on my first experiment. And then one of our wolves got really sick. This is Richard, wake up.
Is this so?
Yes, it's
Close
hot
out.
and it's late. One of our wolves got really sick. And she got distemper. I told you about it earlier. And then we got someone with who knew craniosacral work to work with her. And I told you about it, but I thought you might like to actually see the video. It's an 8-minute video. Here I just took 2 minutes of it. She'd just come into the yurt. That's Jill, the craniosacral. That's Ron with his hands. He just laid her down. She'd never been in a yurt before. She didn't know Jill at all. You can see she's pretty scared. She startled with any new movement or sound, attending to her environment for danger signals, but she quickly settled back down. You see her sigh? She started to attend more and more to what was happening inside her. To all our amazement, she entered into a deep trance. For 40 minutes, this shy, skittish wolf lay there taking in healing energy. When Jill felt she had done enough, she pulled her energy back. Apricot woke up and looked a bit disoriented, as if she had been very far away. She looked around, slowly got up, and started to explore the earth. As we sat there, she came back, laid down, and basically asked for more. Jill worked on it for another 20 minutes. When we were finished, it looked like she was thanking her, grateful. Instead of imposing on her system with drugs, Jill had helped her find her own energy to heal herself. The next day, though her neck was still arched, Apricot had a new look in her eye, bright, energetic. There was a bounce in her step. We asked Jill to come again. This time, Apricot pulled Jill all the way to the yurt. Because his knees hurt on the floor, we decided to try to put her on a massage table. Again, she settled down quickly in this new environment. A wolf settling in on a massage table. She went into a deep healing trance. And when we were finished, just lay there, breathing deeply, eyes closed for a long time as we watched. The third time, she came in and went directly to the massage table, stood up, and put her paws on it. The treatments continue. Apricot is not yet fully healed, but she's much better. She did fully heal, and she lived for quite a few years afterwards. Now, the vets had said there was nothing you could do for the distemper, there was nothing you could do for her paralysis and all of that. And I just loved her too much. I couldn't accept that as an answer. And that's why I asked Jill. And this was the first time for me. So my own journey was, other than starting Earthfire because of the passion of sharing the animals, I was starting on this learning journey of alternative healing. Many years ago, I'd been teaching at a university called the Evergreen State College, and there I met a woman who knew Reiki. And we, with my fairly hardcore scientific background, said, "What the hell is this?" She shared her home with me, so I was living there with her, and I had my wolf dog there. And she had someone come to do Reiki on her. I was co-teaching some psychology with her, and my wolf dog went over and stood there basically and said, "Me." So I said, "Oh, well, maybe there is something to it." And I had a couple of Reiki sessions, and what a profound difference that made. It began to ease some of the fear and the frozenness in me. The first time I ever taught, I was so nervous. I got actually heart disease at the end of the semester. I was just terrified. Obviously, I'm not so terrified anymore. Plus, you're all really nice people, right? But that was just for me. And now I began to see how this was working on a wolf. And then I showed you the pictures of another wolf accepting it, and then a picture of another wolf accepting it, and then a picture of a cougar accepting it. And that was one major learning. So I have two more animal stories to share that to me are major learnings, if you're okay with it, because it's hot. Are you all right? You're not falling asleep? This one is really kind of strange, and that's Teton Totem, the bear I showed you. He was just an ordinary bear, so to speak. He had a very close relationship with Jean, but he was just a bear's bear. And then we noticed that he wasn't able to walk. And he was slowly looks like he was almost completely paralyzed. I do have videos of this. I think some of them are on the website, on YouTube. So he had this huge 1,000-pound grizzly bear dragging himself around his enclosures and wherever he was with his front paws. And his poor little bottom was completely hairless. And we didn't know what to do. I do try Western medicine, so I tried it first. That's another whole story which I'll tell you if you want to stay after 9:30 about what happened there, but it didn't work. What happened when we tried to tranquilize him, all of that stuff. It was awful to watch him, because a wild animal being tranquilized feels losing control, and they don't have any people to comfort them like a dog at a vet, and it was just awful to watch his panic. Anyway, the vet x-rayed him, couldn't find anything, gave him a shot of steroids and said, that's it. If it's not better in a week, you might as well put him down. And I said, no way in hell. He's alive and vibrant in his eyes. He's only like 8 or 10 years old at the time. So I called a friend of mine called Penelope Smith. People ask me if I have telepathic experience with animals, and the sad fact is I don't. I love them dearly, and I don't have that talent. I'm very empathic, but I don't have the telepathy. She was intensely abused as a child. As often happens, they develop really intuitive capacities. She was sort of the founder of the animal communication movement, and I'd invited her up a couple of times to work with the animals and just to teach people. Because I can't do it doesn't mean it isn't true. So I thought, what the heck, and invited her. And so she had met Teton. And I called her up and said, is there some nutrition, something, anything I can do? I wasn't thinking anything larger than that. She was down in Prescott, Arizona, 1,000 miles away, and said, let me see what I can do. And I was expecting take B vitamins or something like that. But instead, this is the part that I'm just telling you the facts, and you will make up what you want of them. She said, let me see if I can connect with him. Now she herself, having been abused, had a really strong connection with her own body, and she said she could feel long distance, Rupert Sheldrake's idea of morphic fields, or whatever it is, she asked him permission, and then long distance, because I could barely believe this, I actually flew down and took a camera and videotaped this, and I have the videotape of her explanation. And she flew down, she said before that, she said she just asked his permission and then felt down into his body. And she felt a blockage, and the blockage was somewhere down at the base of his spine. And she said she could feel a blockage and like a disc was displaced. And she started to try to give him information about what it was and how he might be able to move in order to put it back. The day after I called her, she called me and said, is there any difference? And I was, what do you mean is there any difference? You're in Prescott, he's here. But in fact, we have a pool, and he had dragged himself over to the pool, and dropped his right hind leg in it and started to try to move it. And I said, Penelope, this is weird. This could be chance, but this is what happened. A couple more days later, any difference? Maybe. A couple of days later, maybe. This was in mid-September. By mid-November, he was walking. And me worrying about the bears all the time, but he's going to go to sleep for 4 or 5 months. So how is he going to come out? Is he going to come out paralyzed? Is he going to come out with arthritis? We lined his den with extra warmth. And he came out in the spring walking and sweet. All the bareness of how you would think of a bear is still kind of there, but not so much. And then I began to notice when people would come to visit that they couldn't tear themselves away. We have 5 bears. It was Teton they couldn't tear themselves away from. And he had this beautiful, soft look in his eyes. And people would burst into tears. And as I said earlier, it wasn't once, it was often. And they would say, I asked them to explain it, and they couldn't. They just said they were just so full of emotion, and it was so beautiful. So I began to wonder, what the heck is happening? There's a guy, I can't remember his name, he's from the middle Europe, and he travels around and he does something called the gaze. He just looks at people. I don't know if any of you ever heard of him or knows it. Do you remember his name? Yes, that's who it was. Thank you. So some friend of mine dragged me to see him, wanting me to see it. And I was not really into that. Not that I have anything against it at all, but it's not where my mind naturally goes. So she dragged me to see it, and I saw it, and it was nice. He didn't affect me, but I could see the sweetness in his eyes. But that's what I thought of when I started to see Teton. The look in his eyes, the effect on people who said their lives were changed by this profound encounter, not just because they were terrified of bears before and now they're not, but something happened. And I wondered about that. Is he getting some kind of transmission? And I talked also a little bit about Windwalker and how he changed, the cougar, mountain lion, how he changed over time. A couple of things happened with him. One was, I think a lot of us, hopefully as we get older, we get more spiritual and wiser. And I'm beginning to think it's universal, like we sense a wisdom in an old tree too. So he was getting older, but also Penelope had come up, and this was a very aggressive cougar. I'm going to see if I can find the right pictures. Is it possible to pick up a couple of pictures? Try 50, 51, 52. So he was this macho, aggressive cougar who began to change. It could have been that he was getting older. Mountain lion. Puma, mountain lion, cougar, all the same thing. Which number is that?
50.
Okay, could you do 50, 51, 52? That's the relationship he started to develop with Jean. And 52. That was near the end of his life, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then 57, 58, 59. That's our graveyard. That was where he was receiving Reiki that I showed you before.
This is 57.
That's where he was receiving Reiki. And you can see it's a similar look to the one that was an apricot. I think we all go to the same place. I don't think we're that different. I love that picture. You can see the hand on him there. Next one is 58. This is what he looked like regularly, not someone you'd want to meet in the woods. And this is how he was in his old age. And the next slide. He started to get paralyzed in his back legs, and he would allow people to put him into a wheelchair so he could go out to the garden. No complaints, no fussing, nothing, just he understood and allowed strangers to handle him. Somewhere along the line, between his getting older, Penelope had come to do a workshop, and she had connected with him. I'm endlessly working on a book called probably Unheard Invitations. So I have this written there, and I have a version of it here if anyone wants to look at it, of that particular chapter. He began to, she connected with him. How, I don't know, because I don't do it. And she said his health is beginning to fail. He's beginning to have some trouble with his lungs. But the fact is that she connected with him. And for whatever reason, it's the first time a human being had made a connection with this animal. And my feeling is that's when he changed. And changed profoundly. So that the last few retreats we had, people were surrounding him and he was purring and purring. And I don't know about this, I'm only reporting what people say, is they all felt that they were getting transmissions from him. He would look at each one of them, and they all felt that they had gotten all kinds of wisdom from him. Again, I don't know if this is true or not. I'm sharing with you, because I didn't experience it, I'm sharing with you what people said. But again, it made me begin to think, cougar transmission, bear transmission, Braco transmission? Is there something that's going on where all life is giving each other transmissions or blessings or connections or energy fields, whatever you want to call it? I just started to wonder about it, and I'm still wondering about it. Is it possible that all life is trying to communicate with other life and wants to be see and be seen? And will they all start to glow like people do when they meet Teton and when they met Windwalker? And the other thing I just wanted to emphasize a little more was the wonderful story, the wonderful fact of Humble Bumble Bear. I mentioned it briefly this morning, but this bear, who was obviously learning disabled, he came from a roadside zoo when he was very young, and you would hold him like this and try to feed him, and he just burble and not take in any water and just total panic. It took us a really long time to be able to get him to take a bottle. So something was wrong right from the beginning. But he was so sweet. So when people meet him, they also fall in love. There's like no aggression in him, he's just sweetness. And again, I began to wonder, is that what's there for all of us underneath the biological wiring? Somehow the wiring was damaged in him, and his self-preservation instinct wasn't there. And people fall in love with him. Apart from the fact that, oh, a bear could be learning disabled, of course, why not? Our brain structures are the same fundamentally. So he's not really autistic. When people come to meet him and it's too much for him, he'll start bouncing up and down in the corner until he can relax. But he never sleeps the whole winter because he comes out to meet people. Anybody who walks by, he wants to come out and meet. He's the social grizzly bear. So I have many stories, many slides, but it's late and it's hot, so I think I'll have mercy on you. Any questions you want, ask me. If you do want the newsletters, wherever it is, there, just sign in or find me. And those are the handouts. Help yourselves. Any questions?
What's your website?
Earthfireinstitute.org, all one word, lowercase. Actually, probably come up if you just put in Earthfire. Because I can't have many people come, because I'm not a zoo, and I don't want to impose people on the animals, because when people come, the animals actually try to meet you, because they like people. And you can't have thousands of people coming, it would wear them out. So I keep it very limited. So how can I share it? That's why I made a big website, as much as possible to share it. And one thing you could do to help, if you like to, is just to share the website with other people you know, so more people hear about it. and what we're doing. Other questions?
Do you get the animals?
Many different ways.
Because we gathering them up,
Some are orphaned, mothers have been shot. We actually got a couple of our foxes from fur farms, lynx from fur farms. People who think animals are cute when they're little, and then all of a sudden you have a black bear that's really big. Probably as many variations as you could think of. Most of them we keep for life because they've either been related to people or Fish and Game won't let us to release them. They won't let us release a wolf. They'll just be shot anyway. So that's why I live with them for a lifetime and get to really know them and get to see these things. We also do take animals in for rehabilitation, to release. Yeah?
Has there been any amelioration in your relations with the people who shot the animals at the beginning?
Well, after he finished beating his wife, they moved away.
Oh, that's good.
But in general, the community is now, 20 years later, now there have been no escapes, nobody's coming to the porch to eat their babies, which they actually said was going to happen. The relationships are pretty good. Except for the ranchers, who don't want wolves or bears or anything else.
Is it possible to take a wolf from the forest and to maybe tame him and become close to him and to become friends with the wolf?
Those are two different questions. Friends and tame are two different questions. Tame, no.
No.
The only way to tame most wild animals is if you get in that little window when they're still able to bond. You can have relationships with them, and people do have relationships with animals in the wild. But you also have to be careful, because if you have a relationship and they feel a human safe, and then someone else comes who wants to kill them, you have to be not selfish about it, because you want the experience and put that animal at risk. Yeah?
If you had a bear or a wolf in the wild, would your training teach you how to behave, so you would say?
Yes. Not only that, if you think of the enormous numbers of potential encounters between bears and wolves, say in Yellowstone where there are millions of visitors, compared to the number of bear attacks, they just aren't interested in us to attack. Why would they spend energy attacking us? They're just not interested. They're watching us from the distance, and they're curious, because all of us are curious about each other. But in fact, yes, it does. Where we live, you're supposed to carry bear spray, but there's certain behaviors you can have just to show that you're not threatening. And unless there's something wrong with the bear, like there's some crazy bears, like some crazy people, they're not going to bother. They'll look at you and they'll sort of go that way and you go that way.
I think I heard you say there's a small window, there's an opportunity to tame. Can you say a little more about that?
When wild animals are born, there's a capacity for bonding. To some degree, it's almost like,
Yes.
like Carmlad wrens and his geese. There's a window that's open where they're going to bond with someone who's caring for them while they're still truly helpless. And that's, I call it piercing the veil. It also happens when they're really ill. Like with cucumber, they're totally helpless. They can't do anything about it, and they begin, somehow you're able to get in underneath all the wildness to make a connection, because they understand they're helpless, and yet you're helping them.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions?
Any other more? Do you have any more pictures to show?
If you want to see them.
Do you want to look at a few more pictures before we call the evening?
Yes, roll on. Or?
Just, this is some of the same pictures you've seen and some new ones, but go ahead. Just zip away. That's, go back a bit, one more. You can barely see it. It's a wonderful picture of Jean connecting with Teton when he was young. You can see they're having a conversation. Go ahead. That's Teton, scared by a flower. That's a video of Penelope, which I won't show you now, but you can see another time, talking about what she did with Teton.
The picture before, was it before his change or after his change? Oh, he was getting scared by
Oh, I was exaggerating, he wasn't really scared by a flower. It's-
But was he, you said he went through a change when he was...
Oh, that change was when he was about 9 years old. Here he was still a young bear.
So that was before?
Yeah,
Oh.
and that was also before. A perfectly nice bear, but he was a bear. And then the next one, I don't know if you can see it, it's really hard to get the quality of softness in him. That's the closest picture I have to the quality of softness. Again. That's Humble Bumble Bear. It's another showing, you can see the innocence and there's a little bit of lostness in him. It's a totally different look from Teton. Teton's brilliant. Humble Bumble, not so much. But he's got his own special qualities and charm. The next one. Oh, we saw that already. I think that's near the end. That's probably near the end.
Okay, thank you very much. It was really inspiring.